Brothers and sisters, my concern tonight is to address one thing we believe, which is also not true, and it is something about failure. You know, in our quest for success, we tend to forget that failure is inevitable, or rather, that failure is part of success. And your ability to overcome failure is in itself a mark of success. I have therefore titled this sermon presentation, How to Bounce Back After You Have Failed. We need to know that this life is like a boxing match. Defeat is declared not when you fall, but when you refuse to stand again. So I want to be quick to warn us who are listening tonight. Do not judge any man out there by their successes alone, but judge them by how many times they fell and got back again. When you read the Bible, Paul addresses this issue differently. I invite you to turn to the book of 2 Corinthians. I invite you to turn to the book of 2 Corinthians, chapter number 4, and we shall focus in verse number 8 and verse number 9. 2 Corinthians, chapter number 4, we shall focus in verse 8 and verse 9. And this is what Paul says in verse 8. 2 Corinthians chapter 4 in verse number 8. This is what Paul says in verse number 4. Listen to what Paul is saying here. Chapter number 4 verse 8. It says, "We are hard pressed on every side, but not crushed, perplexed, but not in despair, persecuted, but not abandoned, struck down, but not destroyed. We always carry around in our body the death of Jesus, so that the life of Jesus may also be revealed in our body." If you read this verse in other versions, for example, if you read this verse in the Phillips Bible, this is what it says: "We may be knocked down, but we are never knocked out." If you read this same verse in the Living Bible translation, this is what it says: "We get knocked down, but we get up again and keep going." Friends, this life has taught me several things. This life has taught me that you may be at the end of your rope, but you are not at the end of your hope. This life has taught me that you may be at the end of your rope, but you are not at the end of your hope. This life again has taught me that you may be down in the deep ditches of defeat and despair, but you need not stay there, because through Christ you can get up again and go on. At the close of this presentation, I intend to remind you that no one out there need to be discouraged on account of failure. For God in heaven has made more than adequate provision for us in Jesus Christ. I'm also here to remind us tonight that through Christ, grace is always available to all who are battling with their failures. They need to know that once they are connected with Christ, there can be no failure. And every time we are introduced down here before our fellow men, they, in their introduction of us, they always talk about our successes, and no one talks about our failures. But tonight, I will be talking to you as an expert of failure, for I have failed big time. I have failed many times. And this is why I always tell my friends that if failure was an education, then I am the most highly educated person. I am also in good company when I talk about failure, for all of us are graduates from that same school of failure. We have all failed, and yet we seldom talk about our failures. We often talk about other people's failures. We even form WhatsApp groups and side chats to chat about them, while at the same time covering our own failures. So, brothers and sisters, tonight we want to talk about failure and how we can bounce back after we have failed. Someone with the fear of failure may be so much scared to try new things. Someone who still lives with the fear of a relationship may be scared to try a new one. And you know, the fear of failure affects almost all of us. We fear to fail at school. We fear to fail at our job places. We fear to fail in our families. We fear to fail in our marriages. We fear to fail in our relationship. We fear to fail in our businesses. Friends, we fear to fail even in our careers. And all of us are in a school of failure. And yet we don't want to talk about failure. In our society today, failure is a taboo subject, especially Christians don't talk about failure. Christians don't talk about failure. And when we meet someone who has failed in a way, we frown about their failures. You know, in our society today, success is the celebrity who attracts much attention. But failure is the outcast, the one that is often blamed. Failure is often rejected. It is scorned, it is punished by society, whether it is a secular failure or a religious failure. In fact, in our lives, there are more records of failure than successes. And yet, when we get to talk about ourselves, it is much easier for us to talk about our successes than our failures. Because we seldom talk about our failures, many people out there think that they are alone in their struggles with failure. There is something that I've learned in my ministry. When we seldomly talk about our failures and get more focused on other people's failures, then the many people who are struggling out there with failure begin to think that they are alone in their struggles with failure. They are crying out